If the subject of our next item were a tragedy which had taken place in a single event, everyone would have heard of it. But the haemophilic blood contamination scandal of the 1970s and 80s didn't happen in one day. That happened over many years. In that time, 5,000 haemophiliacs were infected with hepatitis C and 1,200 with HIV from contaminated blood clotting products administered by the National Health Service. So far, nearly 2,000 people have died. It's a quiet tragedy, yet despite its scale, there have been no prosecutions, no apologies, not even a public inquiry. So tonight, a hard-hitting play telling the story of two of those victims opens at the Strathpeffer Pavilion. The play is called Factor 9, and tonight's performance is the first of 13 around Scotland this month. We're joined from the Inverness studio by the writer Hamish MacDonald and two actors, Matthew Zajac and Stewart Porter. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi.
Hamish, this is quite a story. What made you decide that you were going to dramatise it?
Well, it's an incredible story that we were aware of had affected people in our own community, and was a story that also had, global impact. I was listening to your figures there and the introduction. Those are actually just numbers affected in the UK.
I know.
The numbers.
That's what I couldn't believe. I thought that has to be international.
The numbers worldwide are colossal.
But 2,000 people died in the UK.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it's been a hidden tragedy. So the fact that people have been effectively screaming in the dark for something like 30 years really made it a story that was crying out to be told. And we knew people who it affected, as I say, in our own community here in Inverness. So it became really a compelling story to tell from our point of view, from Dogstar Theatre Company.
Well, you focus on two people who have been infected, Rab Mackey, who was infected with HIV, and Bruce Norval, who was infected with Hep C.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, the way we've told the story is we want to connect what happened in Scotland with what happened globally, and effectively, contaminated blood was originally sourced from the American prison system and from Skid Row neighbourhoods in America. Despite warnings, the government never paid heed to contaminated plasma supplies.
So these were already at-risk communities?
These were
Prison.
already, prisons, high infection risks. And this was known. So when HIV and hepatitis came along and kind of on a catastrophic scale, attempts were made to understand the AIDS pandemic, for example, and Rab Mackey was a haemophiliac in Edinburgh, and Bruce Norval was a haemophiliac from Inverness. Bruce contaminated hepatitis C, and Rab contracted HIV. But Rab's case is quite stunning because he wasn't told of his HIV status for 3 years, and discovered some 16 years after the fact that he had been part of a clinical study and research study to understand the AIDS virus. So this whole episode ties in with the global impact of AIDS.
So this is happening in our day and age. He hadn't been told that he was HIV positive.
That's correct. It's a powerful story to have to tell, and it carries a great weight of responsibility.
Has he had any kind of compensation?
Not uniquely. The compensation, if he has received, would have been just part of an overall deal, I believe. But I don't really discuss the compensation with them. What I wanted to know was their life stories. Yeah. Well, justice is what he wants, Mm-hmm. So we in the story can reach back to the sourcing of plasma from America. We can tell the story of how Bruce became infected, and we can connect that with the stigmatisation of AIDS on communities who were basically just haemophiliacs, and also the need for medical research to pin down the AIDS virus, of which Rab became a central part without his consent. So it's a very powerful and shocking story.
And Bruce Norval was involved in encouraging you, I believe, to do the play.
Yes, Bruce and Matthew originally met up. It happened at a football match here in Inverness. That they're both Cali supporters, and Bruce would occasionally tell us his story. And we've been trying for several years to get this story off the ground, and we're given help from our friends in Profile Theatre in Sweden to finally realise it. So it's been a long process, but we've got there.
Well, the play was met with tremendous acclaim in Sweden and Denmark. I mean, stunning reviews.
Absolutely, yeah. You know, the guys have made such a magnificent job of the production. And, you know, we were overwhelmed by the response in Sweden and Denmark. And, you know, we've been overwhelmed by the response internationally because, as I mentioned, this is a global tragedy, and we recently started a Kickstarter crowdfunding campaign to take the show to the Fringe, and we've had responses of people pledging money to us whose families have been affected from as far afield as America and Australia. So it's really very humbling and very moving, the response that we've had to the show.
And have you had people in the audience whose family have been affected?
We have. We've had, I've had people contacting me saying they're coming to forthcoming shows as well. You know, there's someone coming from Shetland to Aberdeen who's flying down, especially to see the show, who was a woman who lost blood during childbirth and was given factor VIII to stem the blood, but it turns out that she didn't need that factor VIII. So. And she's got hepatitis, so we've got people. You know, stories like that just keep flooding in. You know,
there was a woman in the audience in Wales last week whose brother died 25 years ago, and she said for her it was a profoundly brilliant experience.
Well, I suppose it's somebody giving voice, isn't it? Something that's troubled you all that time. It's your personal tragedy. It validates it in some way, doesn't it? Matthew, you play Bruce Norval, who got Hep C. How familiar were you with the story before you got involved in the project?
Well, I was vaguely aware of it. It's been an underreported story, I would say. Most people know nothing of it, but I had read one or two newspaper articles about it, and I should correct you, actually, because there has been one in public inquiry commissioned by the British government called the Archer Inquiry.
It's a private inquiry.
Oh, was it private? Oh, I beg your pardon. You're better informed than I am. And I've been studying this for weeks. But yeah, that's right, because it was funded by a member of the House of Lords. And of course, there's the Scottish Government's current inquiry, which is due to report later this year, the Penrose inquiry. But I just had a vague kind of knowledge of it, and I met Bruce through a mutual friend, as Hamish said, at a Cali match a few years ago, and I was really quite overwhelmed when Bruce just told me his story and what happened to him, and the tireless campaigning that he's been conducting with friends and colleagues for the last 20 years on behalf of all the victims. And I should also point out that these 2,000 deaths haven't stopped. They're continuing. You know, a friend of Bruce's just died a few weeks ago, and
how do you manage the anger when you're on stage, though? Because it's a story that must make you so angry when you're...
Yeah, well, to be quite honest, it's one of the angriest, if not the angriest play that I've ever been part of.
Well, it has to be.
Yeah, I mean, there are one or two laughs, but it's a story full of anger, and understandably, Rab and Bruce are men who are full of anger because of the fact that they've been working so hard to be heard on behalf of all the victims, and you know, it's almost like a piece of agitational political theatre in some ways. But we hope that we're kind of honouring the actual truth of the story, and there's certainly nothing in the play which is not already in the public domain in one way or another, aside from some of the more personal passages to do with the lives of Bruce and Rab.
Stuart, you play Robert Mackey. Do you find it as challenging as Matthew?
Absolutely, and I think Rab, the character, is even angrier. He's the personification of anger. And when I became involved in the project, I was astounded like Matthew, was unearthing things that had happened, and I couldn't believe that in this day and age, in this country, it's a horror story that you expect to come from someplace else in the less developed world from years ago. That
Well, it's like a massive conspiracy.
I honestly couldn't get my head around it at the time, and I, personally, as a healthy person, was absolutely furious with what had gone on, and also terribly affected emotionally by what it must have meant for these people. I mean, these were people that were trying for a family and everything, and hadn't been told that they could infect their loved ones. It just beggars belief that this thing could happen, and to be covered up, as you say, it just makes it even more criminal.
I'm going to see it when it's in Edinburgh. You're coming to the Traverse, aren't you?
Yeah.
Playing in Strathpeffer tonight. Can we maybe hear an extract from the play now? Hamish, perhaps you would set this up. The play's called Factor 9. Factor 9 being the missing factor, isn't it, for haemophiliacs in the blood coagulation? Am I right in thinking that?
Yeah. Factor 8 and Factor 9 are basically just a product to aid blood clotting, to stop bleeding for haemophiliacs. So in this is a kind of it's more of a closing scene, part of a scene where Rab and Bruce are reflecting on how their Factor 8 and Factor 9 is actually sourced.
We are cheaper than laboratory chimpanzees.
We are blood, harvested from the corpses of Soviet morgues, from the slums of Haiti and Bogota.
We are even porcine blood products, made in Scotland, black pudding, from the blood of pigs.
We are the fractionated plasma of murderers, rapists and thieves.
We committed none of these crimes, but they put us on death row. We are haemophilia A
and haemophilia B.
We are Factor 8
and Factor 9. We are hepatitis C
and AIDS.
All we ever did was to be born with a genetic condition. How is it possible to even exist in this madness, knowing what we know? We've had it.
I thought you'd never lie down.
I won't, mate. I'm just tired out from another heavy round. I'll go to my corner, wait for the bell, get back in the ring again. That's how it was it? You were either one or the other, a shrinking violet or a fighter. I'm running in the streets and I have a fall, I bleed. They take me in, I'm given cryoprecipitate, bed rest for 2 weeks. You mind how it was? We shout and slag each other. It's all part of it.
We'll always be a tribe.
Imagine if they never filled our arms with that Factor junk. Life out there is a perfect home movie with beaches and picnics, responsibility, a career, no illnesses, no procession of funeral cars, no campaigns. Even if I was going to die younger, it would have been a life.
Your hand was dealt you long since.
And that's the scene.
It is utterly compelling. I don't want you to stop.
Okay.
You're playing two characters there. There's only two actors in the play, but you've got to go from doing that emotionally, hugely challenging performance to being other characters. That's the way of modern theatre, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. Well, I guess it's possible we might do it with more actors if we had more money. But in some ways, in some ways, it's a very kind of focused and intense performance for the audience. To watch two actors doing what we're doing, and it's quite physical in its own way, but also we play prisoners from the Arkansas prison system of the 60s where there were some really appalling things happened. We play a whole series of doctors. We play Rab and Bruce when they were boys. Stewart plays Fritz Termeer, who was the chairman of Bayer, one of the big pharmaceutical corporations, who was actually a Nazi war criminal and became the chairman of Bayer not that long after the war, to be honest. So there's a panoply of heroes and villains in this play.
I'm joined from our Inverness studio by writer Hamish MacDonald and actors Matthew Zajac and Stewart Porter, and we're talking about Factor 9, which is Dog Star Theatre production, which I have to say, guys, I'm still shaking from that extraordinarily powerful performance that you gave us earlier on. I just wonder. I just wonder how you can move on from this. There you are. You're performing on the telly, aren't you? In Shetland, it must seem nothing compared with what you have to do on stage.
Yeah, it's a lot easier doing Shetland, I would say. Although, there are sometimes some things that you have to do on film or TV which are, quite extreme. But no, this is a very intense performance. There's no doubt about it. But I have to say, quite a few of our productions have got that kind of intensity, whether they're comedies or tragedies, in one way or another, because they do tend to make demands on the audience, entertaining though they are. I mean, I have to say, I'm biased, but this is a very strong piece of theatre, putting aside what the content of the show is. I think that anyone who comes to it will get a lot out of it as a piece of theatre. There's fantastic video design, set design, lighting design. Sound and music are wonderful, so we've been very lucky with the team that we've had to put
That's
this
what
together.
all the reviews have said. Do you think the audiences in Scotland welcome that kind of challenging theatre?
I think so, yes. That's certainly what I would prefer to see. I'm not very keen on going along to see something and having it all laid out on a plate for me. I like to be made to think and to come out wondering, well, what was that actually about, rather than everything being tied up neatly for me.
Can I ask all three of you before we go, what you want to have achieved by this play and the performance?
Well, I think to try and ask questions is very important. That we can't give all the answers, and not to downplay the tragedy in any way, but the fighting spirit of the people involved has been utterly inspirational, and I want people to take that from it as well. It'd be a terrible cliche to say that out of adversity comes, positive things and all that nonsense. I mean, there aren't many positives to take, but really the fighting spirit of the victims and their families is utterly inspirational. I would hope that part of the story, does have some influence on people's thinking as they go away.
Matthew and Stuart?
Yeah, as Hamish says, just to try and ask the questions in public and to put over the information and to let people make up their own mind. I mean, it is an absolutely harrowing episode, and hopefully, our publicising it will speed up the process and get justice for the victims and for their families.
I think this is a warning in a way. This story for people for ordinary people, for everyone, at whatever level they are in society, whatever amount of power they have, to be vigilant and to be aware of the way that money and power can be abused, and I think it's very important that the wider public is made more aware of this particular story
and case.
And we've been very lucky because we've already had nearly 150 people contributing to the Kickstarter campaign to enable us to put this on at the Fringe, which I think we will now manage to do. But I would also make a plea to anyone who's listening, if they want to go to Kickstarter Factor 9 to make some kind of contribution. It can be £1, it can be £5, it can be £100. That would be great. But it's just getting the story out to as wide a public as possible, I think, is a way of trying to work against this kind of thing happening again.
Hamish MacDonald, Matthew Zajac and Stewart Porter, thank you very much indeed. Factor 9 is a Dog Star theatre production and runs throughout April at various venues around Scotland. You can find out more information from the company's website,